Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is taking part in this year's afternoon dialogue on ways to improve investment. We cross to that now.
Of our country's economic reconstruction and recovery plan is the goal of building new, fast-growing economy, more inclusive, propelled by greater levels of public and private sector investment. It's quite important to that emphasis. Both public and private sector investment. I need to talk to you later about that. We're very clear that the challenge of poverty, unemployment, and inequality will only be effectively addressed through high levels of inclusive economic growth. Specifically, our recovery plan calls for mobilization of both public and private sector investment to drive an infrastructure-led recovery. I think we're all familiar with that, which was presented by the President in October last year. The plan envisages new investment in energy, water, and sanitation, roads and bridges, human settlement, health and education, digital infrastructure, and public transport. But we also need investment, particularly domestic investment. I want to emphasize domestic investment because there's the tendency to think that when we want investment, we've got to travel to Washington, go to all these big places in order to get investment. I take a different view. Why I take this different view, I want to share with you some experiences. At the ANC headquarters, we said some time ago, let's bring somebody who probably will tell us something we don't want to know. We brought Iraj in that meeting. And you must know, at that point in time, a number of people in the ANC held a view incorrectly, in my view. That is what is called an investment strike. In this discussion, Iraj brought an interesting perspective and cited examples of companies. He said, you know what, guys? Companies in South Africa want to invest, but are not investing, but because you are not creating a conducive environment for them to invest. He highlighted at the time, one of his clients was Vedanta, which was brought the zinc facilities from Anglo and couldn't proceed because they couldn't get the environmental permits, they couldn't get the road infrastructure in place. So I'm raising this issue because part of what I want to say is that what we needed to do, what government intends to do is to invest in this infrastructure, is to make sure that private sector invest as well. Now, on the public infrastructure side, we're grappling with an instrument of how to do this thing. Because part of what we need to do is to bring in private sector to participate in this infrastructure span. Last week, we had a meeting with ASISA. Let me tell you why it is too important for me that to have this discussion with the private sector. Is that on the one hand, I've got pressure from my political party, which says let's introduce prescribed assets. Prescribed assets assume, incorrectly in my view, that business do not want to invest in certain asset classes, in particular the infrastructure. On the one hand, there's no instrument or an environment which helps private sector to put their money. So that we should deal with this thing and make this infrastructure investment. We've agreed with ASISA last week that we have got to put a common team, and that team has got to make sure that we can create an appropriate instrument in which the private sector can put some money and invest in public sector infrastructure. So what is my message on that? Is that we've got to find a way between ourselves and business. How do we only work together on the public infrastructure, but we also have business in their normal day-to-day business in a company like Vedanta to be able to invest and remove all the necessary obstacles which impact on that. I'm trying to be practical and not talk all these big names people utilize. In this regard, the debate about the structural reforms must be seen in that context. The debate about the structural reforms must be seen in that context. Let me utilize just count a couple of them. One of them is the issue of electricity. If you can take a date from 2009 to 2021, when we first had the outages, it's 13 years. Over the last 13 years, we spent most of our time trying to fix ESCOM, not fixing electricity supply. And that paradigm, we need a paradigm shift, which says what has got to be changed and focus of government is to ensure that we've got security of electricity supply. Let's not talk ESCOM, let's talk security of electricity supply. How we do that must be a matter of detail as a nation. The second issue is spectrum we're dealing with. And again, we're going to close this debate, finalize it. However much it takes, it must be closed. Even here, we've had one of the greatest challenges we've had over the time. We've had about more than 11 ministers in 12 years in the same department, which has made it difficult to do what is supposed to when everyone comes back as if the other minister was from another party, comes back and start and do something new. So we've got to conclude this thing as a matter of urgency. The third issue, we must follow the global trend. And that global trend, we were one of the biggest emitters. We've got to say, what are we going to do about the green economy as a nation? And part of the mistake is to think that we are going to hang all of this debate on the green economy and ESCOM. My view is that we've got to talk about a green economy as a nation and across all sectors. And to the extent that it is necessary, electricity is going to be prioritized. It must be prioritized, not depending on ESCOM, falling into the history we've done in the past. The fourth point is improve on our logistics. You know, if you ask ArcelorMittal how much does it take for them to take iron ore in Session and land in Newcastle. By the time it lands in Newcastle, it's almost over double the price they did to buy for the cost of purchasing. We've got to sort that out. The fifth point, we've got to make it easy doing business in South Africa. Very easy. I sit with a guy who owns 13 spas in the Eastern Cape. He says, you know, to get a zoning license in East London is 2 years. To get a zoning license in Cape Town is 80 days. I'm feeling guilty because it's run by my opponent, Cape Town, but that's the truth. Okay? That's the truth, even if it's run by my opponent. So we've got to change all these minor irritations, such as the regulatory burden. regulatory burden. I had the unfortunate thing in the past when I was still at Lutuli House, when the Guptas came to campaign. Forget about that. Just listen to the story I'm going to tell you. They came up to complain about what the banks were doing. So I was asked to call all these banks and talk about it. And Sim came with an interesting, huge document. In this document, Sim says, you know what, we've got 208 regulations that govern us as bank. Maria came in from ABSA, said the same thing. Each of these banks has got to employ about 3,000 people just for compliance. Just for compliance. So my sense is that one of the things we needed to do is to deal with these practical people of making sure that the business who want to do business in South Africa can do it before we can travel and go and invite other people from overseas or all those countries. People in South Africa want to go on and about their business and invest, and we must allow them to invest. Then we can have and tell others they must come and invest in South Africa. I remember in 1 year I was in France, I was talking about how good South Africa is, and somebody raises a hand. He says, oh, I'm trying to invest in South Africa, but it's taking me 2 years to get an environmental permit. You know? So main things, these are basic things which may not necessarily be the big things which politicians and everybody talk about, but from a business person, they count. So that regulatory burden has got to be taken into account. I wanted just to be myself today and say, I'm not going to throw you with numbers, all these kind of things. Everybody knows how many people are in employment, what is the level of investment on GDP, all of those things. You know all of that. I can't give you a lecture on that. So all I wanted to say, where I sit, these are the things that we need to do in order to make sure that business can operate. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Minister. I hope you do have a bit more time with us so that we can pose a few questions to you. So just in response to some of the issues that you've raised, I hope you haven't disappeared. Just in response to some of the issues that you've raised, when it comes to, the regulatory burdens and so on and so forth, where do you see the low-hanging fruit such that environmental permits and water permits and the like don't take as long as they currently do? What can you do or the ministry do to expedite those processes? Is the minister still there?
Is still here.
Okay.
I'm 1 month, 25 days in the job. Do you know that? I'm 1 month, 25 days in the job.
Yes, sir.
I can't finish all of these things in those few days, but let me put the following. I've scanned the environment up to the level where I've interacted with SALGA, which represent local government, and said to them, these things need to go. I'm working with them in terms of the regulatory impact we need to make in order to make those changes. Those changes must take place. I saw an article this week which I shared with the president. Somebody here in Pretoria was arrested for planting in his garden and went beyond, and the plantation went beyond his own garden and was arrested for that. It can't be right. So what we need to do is to make sure that people come to South Africa, business. There was a business person I like, a man called Leslie Boyd. You would disagree with Leslie Boyd, but he's going to tell you what you don't like as a politician. You know what I mean? That's what Leslie. The year before he died, we were at a golf course in Sun City. I was saying to him, he told us that if he can't, when he sets up a business, he's not setting up a business because he wants to create jobs. He was setting up a business because he wanted to make money. He reminded me another thing. He said, by the way, if I can't fire, I can't employ. So we've got to have a confrontation, a discussion with business and labor about the hard choices we need to make for this economy to grow.
Minister,
Thank you.
there was a rather controversial, if I can put it like that, interview that was done, or maybe a monologue that was done last week by a wealthy businessman. He lives here in South Africa. His name is Rob Hersov. He comes from a moneyed background and he's into mining and other things. He has most of his investments offshore, but he's a significant person in the sense that he does have investments here in South Africa. And one of the things that he said was that South Africa was uninvestable. How do we move away from a situation where, on the one hand, we look at the cold realities, the challenges that we have as a country, and not just be negative about it and find solutions to it? And to what extent would you agree with the sentiments that he made or had, if you heard some of it? Just your comments around that.
Look, I've known Rob for years. Let me just make that point. On my appointment, he was one of the people who first congratulated me. We have been communicating. The last message I received from him is today. All right. I've known him. He belongs to a family which has got some history of investment. His family, together with Emmanuel, set up what was called the Anglo-Vale. He's still part of the Anglo-Vale Industries, which owns J&J. He sits on that, but I've known him. I know his company called Invest Africa. So I've known Rob for years. We communicate. I don't think Rob hates South Africa. He's spending most of the time. The message Rob was sending is that his company is the one that is promoting invest in Africa. So he was communicating a message that says it's becoming difficult to sell South Africa for a number of reasons. It's not an anti-South Africa, which I could see a number of people, including my colleagues, WhatsApp group. Who's this man? Who's this man? I love him very fast. We like each other. And I think Rob was sending a message, and clearly in my view correctly, which says, South Africa is becoming difficult to sell South Africa. We've got to change course. And I agree with him in that regard.
I have a question from one of the viewers. How does vandalism of infrastructure by the public increase costs if law enforcement is not firm in terms of holding perpetrators responsible? Does it create an enabling environment for destruction?
Look, 2 days ago, here in this office, I was sitting with the Minister of Police. I was saying the greatest challenge we face, among the priorities we need to do, is to deal with growth, but growth will not be sustainable for as long as law enforcement is not taking place. I was asking the question, what will it take for police to do what is necessary? For instance, there's people called Amade Lagofo. You start building up, they rock up and demand 30%. There are places in South Africa where, as a South African, I'm not allowed because foreigners dominated. What kind of country is that? So clearly, you can't blame Rob. I'm going back to Rob's story. You can't then blame Rob. When Rob says, guys, it's difficult to sell your country, one of the things we need to be dealing with is criminality. We must be on top. We can't achieve the growth level we require unless we deal with them.
Minister, we are going to leave it there. There is just not enough time to speak to you, but we're so grateful that you did have time for us. Thank you so much. That was Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much.
Super.
I'm also very, the fact that I could not be with you today and full day, I would have went to listen to other colleagues and other panelists and see and learn from it, because the good thing about these things, why I like attending them, because it's a two-way process. You learn. So I'm going to miss lot of learning out of all of these discussions. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, sir. Luckily, it's being recorded, so if you do have time, you can reflect on some of the issues that were discussed. Thank you so much, the Finance Minister there, Enoch Godongwana.
We'll have more news coming up after the short break.